Hello, everyone. This week, I thought I'd do something a little different in responding to your work, and that is not respond to your work and do something different this week. For every reading, I ask you to an assignment where you pick out a quote that you think, in some way, indicates the main theme or the most important aspect of a particular reading, and that's a very hard task. It's actually, in many cases, an impossible task because there is no one quote that captures in any obvious way the, the, the main thrust of a reading. But I think that it's a good exercise. It's a good exercise in making judgments about what you read and say, well, this text says a lot of things, but what is the, the, the thing that I would point to as being indicative of why the author wrote it in the first place? It may be impossible really to do that, but it's a good exercise to try. And so what I thought I'd do is to look at the three readings of the apology, the three parts of the apology that I asked you to read, and tell you what I would have picked out if I had to do a daily reading assignment. That is to pick out a particular quote and to tell you why I chose it. And I'll tell you that I am very unoriginal. I'm pretty familiar with this text. I've been reading it longer than you've been alive, actually. Which is, I don't know what that means, but I've been reading it over many years, and I'm pretty familiar with it. And the quotes that I'm going to give you are some of the most famous quotes that would pop up in any sort of wiki quote thing on Plato or Socrates or something. This is from the first reading. And the quote here is on page 4. So I left him. Let me just make this a little bigger. So I left him, saying to myself as I went away, well, although I do not suppose that either of us knows anything really beautiful and good, I am better off than he is, for he knows nothing and thinks that he knows. I neither know nor think that I know. In this latter particular, then, I seem to have slightly the advantage of him. The context of this, of course, is when Socrates hears from his friend Chaerephon that the Delphic oracle said that he's the wisest man of all, and he's shocked by that because he's very consciously aware that he doesn't really know anything. So he goes to different people asking them what they know and trying to find out what the oracle could have meant. But in this, the story of going to the politicians, going to the poets, going to the craftsmen, and finding out that the Delphic oracle might have been right. You know, I mean, Socrates knows that he knows nothing, but he knows that he knows nothing, right? Um, Whereas the politicians, the poets, especially, the people who are admired, the people who are thought to be smart, and the people who are influential and powerful and admired and thought to be competent and thought to be knowledgeable, turn out not to know anything. So that they're just like him in one important difference is that they're ignorant and they don't know it, whereas Socrates is painfully aware of his own ignorance. Um, that seems to me to be incredibly important. We get frustrated with Socrates sometimes. You know, we read the dialogues. He seems to be going in circles, as he's often accused of. And I think it's because he's really trying. You know, he's really trying to find something out for sure that he can say that he knows, and I think it's really admirable. You know, that is to have that kind of humility, and I would say, despite a lot of students saying that Socrates is arrogant, and I think that's a very reasonable criticism of Socrates, especially in the Apology, that he does seem to be arrogant, and maybe he is, but he's also humble. That is, if he's arrogant, he is also humble, and that would just mean that he has contradictory character traits like we all do. And the humility is that he really, I think I take him at his word here, he really doesn't know anything, at least as he says, anything really beautiful and good. I mean, anything really important. You know, I mean, he may have little bits of knowledge like we all do, like how to tie our shoes or how to find our way to the store to buy a carton of milk. But when it comes to really important things, I think he's being straightforward. I think he knows nothing, and he knows at least that it's better to know that you know nothing than to labor under the delusion that you know something when you really don't. So that's what I would pick for the first reading. Here's the second reading. And I believe that the context here is that Socrates is sort of indicating to the jury what sort of punishment, if they found him guilty, what sort of punishment they might be thinking of giving him. And one of the things that he is indicating to them is that exile would not be acceptable to him because or stop, any sort of punishment that would require him to shut up and stop doing philosophy, stop asking people questions. He just couldn't tolerate it. And here, particularly, he's acknowledging that people get angry with him because of what he does, but because he shows people that they don't know what they thought they knew, and sometimes that can be highly embarrassing, especially for people who think a lot of themselves, and especially for people who have garnered a reputation for wisdom. And this is on page 2 of the reading, right in the middle of the page. Very famous part of the Apology. He says, "For if you kill me," and they do kill him in a way, right? They find him guilty and they sentence him to death. He says, "For if you kill me, you will not easily find another like me, who, if I may use such a ludicrous figure of speech, I'm a sort of gadfly, given to the state by the god. And the state is like a great and noble steed who is tardy in his motions, owing to his very size, and requires to be stirred into life. I am that gadfly, which God has given the state, and all day long and in all places I'm always fastening upon you, arousing and persuading and reproaching you. And as you will not easily find another like me, I would advise you to spare me. I dare say that you may feel irritated at being suddenly awakened when you are caught napping, and you may think that if you were to strike me dead, as Anytus advises, which you easily might, then you would sleep on for the remainder of your lives, unless God, in his care of you, gives you another gadfly." Well, again, I mean, isn't there something contradictory right there? I mean, in terms of arrogance and humility. That Socrates at once compares himself to an insect, and says that he is a gift from God to the Athenians. I mean, on the one hand, I'm like a bug, he says. On the other hand, he says I'm a gift from God. I mean, it's pretty amazing. But the metaphor of the gadfly, which is just a stinging fly, and comparing the city of Athens to a large horse that is lazy and is fallen asleep, and Socrates says he is the insect that comes and stings it awake. It's such a potent metaphor because on the one hand, it is the way that every critic, every social critic, every person who wants to reform or change or wake up the political community, it's how every, I think, critic thinks of themselves. And on the other hand, it shows just how dangerous it can be to be a social critic because you're this little stinging insect, and the state or the political community is this powerful horse that could just step on you. But so it's dangerous to be a critic. But what is he saying? I try to wake you up. And again, I think this relates to the earlier quote that he is, that he is just trying to get people to think. He's trying to get people to realize that they don't really know what they thought they knew, that they're living in a fog, they're living in a dream. But this metaphor of the gadfly is an incredibly famous part of the Apology. It's nothing original in my choice of it. It's just great. Third reading, also not original at all on my part, but very very famous part of the Apology. This is towards the end. Socrates says, "Someone will say, 'Yes, Socrates, but cannot you hold your tongue? And then you may go into a foreign city and no one will interfere with you.'" This is actually where he's, saying basically, "Don't sentence me to exile. I would rather die." "Now I have a great difficulty," Socrates says, "in making you understand my answer to this. For if I tell you that this would be a disobedience to a divine command," remember, he's big theme in the Apology that Socrates has characterized what he does in religious terms, that the God has told him to do philosophy, that is, to ask people what they know, to ask people philosophical questions. "For if I tell you that this would be a disobedience to a divine command, and therefore that I cannot hold my tongue, you will not believe that I'm serious. So you'll think that's my irony, that I'm kidding you." But he's saying, I'm not. I really believe that I have a duty to annoy you, because I have a duty to try to wake you up. "And if I say again that the greatest good of man is daily to converse about virtue, and all that concerning which you hear me examining myself and others, and that the life which is unexamined is not worth living, that you are still less likely to believe, and yet what I say is true." That's perhaps the most famous thing that Plato ever wrote. It's the most famous thing that was ever attributed to Socrates as saying. And it's often quoted simply as, "The unexamined life is not worth living," depending on the translation and, just paraphrase. That is, I think, one of the boldest, most challenging things that anybody ever said. That the unexamined life is not worth living. And that is, that living a life without thinking about how you should live your life is not even worth doing. It is such a potent claim. It's such a challenging claim, because basically what it says is that to be a human being is to be a rational creature. And to be a rational creature is not just to live, but to think about how you should live. It's, again, if you looked at the wiki quotes from the Apology, which I guess exists, I don't know, you'd find all of these things. There's nothing original in what I said, but those are the things that I would choose.